And so we're going to ask Commissioner Kelly McCreary to come on up. He's going to pray tonight and say the pledge for us. Thank you, Kelly. Let's all stand together.
Good evening, everybody. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for life. We thank you for our freedom. We thank you for this country that we call the United States of America. We thank you for all the people that you've placed here, especially in Gillette, Wyoming. The good ones, the bad ones, and everything in between. We all have the right to worship, to praise, to hate if we choose, whatever. But God, we just thank you that you have people lined up to do your will, to represent you, because we as believers are ambassadors for Jesus. And I don't take that lightly. I just thank you for it. And I thank you for all the people here tonight. I ask that you give them wisdom, come into their hearts, give them peace, give them a confidence that they know that you are in charge. And we just continue to thank you for the awesome job that you do as God, because we know it will turn out good, and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Now, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Kelly. You may be seated. I will introduce you to our president, Mr. Lyle Austin, who's on the side here. You may come up and say hi, or you can just...
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I won't pass it up. Good evening. As Pastor Vesisti said, I am Lyle Austin. I guess we're co-founders, is that correct?
I'm not a founder, no.
You're not a founder?
I'm a flounder.
Oh, you're a flounder, okay. Okay, and I'm in some sort of I don't know which one. Yeah. So we've got some pretty good speakers here this evening. And again, I want to welcome all of you here as well. I think we're going to have some debate. We may have some hurt feelings. We may have some people that understand better about what's going on as we get into this. And who's first?
Scott will be first.
Okay.
And Rebecca Painter will be second.
Do you want to bring him on now?
I can bring him up, yes.
Okay, I'll let you introduce Scott.
Okay, all right. Come on up, Scott. You're going to have to go up to the center aisle and make believe you're getting married. And Scott's going to share with us tonight whatever's on his heart, and I know he's all over the legal aspect of this, and so I can't think of anyone more qualified to share with us tonight. If anybody doesn't know what's going on, I think a week ago, yesterday, came across the wires that we are now entertaining a hate ordinance in Gillette, Wyoming. I'm totally against it. I wear my feelings on my sleeve. And so we're here tonight, so if you are for it, you may share tonight why you're for it. Please do. But this is what it's all about. This is what our country's all about. So Scott, why don't you share with us how you're going to move forward?
Yeah, well, welcome everyone. My name is Scott Clem. I've met many of you. How many of you are, just kind of by a show of hands, are pretty familiar with the topic here tonight? Okay, that's good. That's just about everybody. Maybe a few hands that aren't. For those of you who didn't raise your hand or you're not so familiar, this is commonly something that many legislators refer to as SOGI legislation, sexual orientation, gender identity legislation, or in this case, it's a city council ordinance. Just a little background. I served in the state legislature from 2015 to 2020. I served for 3 terms. I didn't run for a 4th term. At that time, I was pastoring a church, and they needed me there more than I was needed in Cheyenne. I guess that's maybe arguable to some folks, but it is a citizen legislature. We don't have it's all part-time. There are no permanent, full-time legislators in the state of Wyoming, and you should thank your lucky stars for that. That's the way that it should be. It should be a citizen legislature. My first year in 2015, we were getting ready to deal with another SOGI legislation, and often it's billed as some kind of anti-discrimination kind of legislation or something along those lines. I'll speak more to that in just a moment, but a little bit of background. The previous year, before I had come in, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it had the legislation had passed the House, which was more liberal the year before, and it had failed in the Senate. And then my first year, my freshman year, it started in the Senate, it passed the Senate, and then it came over to the House. And there was some real consternation that this thing was going to pass. And it was pretty phenomenal. I could tell you, just stories. There was people up in the galleries praying and all. I mean, it was just a groundswell of people that were there, and we defeated that thing, and it was pretty amazing. And this has been a long time coming. So several attempts trying to get this SOGI legislation passed. Just for a little bit of information, Wyoming is so we're told one of 2 states that do not have something like this on the books. Praise the Lord for that, right? So hopefully we can keep it that way. The main pushers behind this are Wyoming Equality. Wyoming Equality is like the LGBTQ advocacy group for the state. And they're the ones who really push this stuff. They exploit children. They make them their poster children. Horrible, horrible organization. And they changed tactics. What they decided to do, because they couldn't get it through the legislature, is they decided that they were going to target towns. And they were going to institute ordinances all across the state of Wyoming. And so I don't remember who they started with. I want to say it's Laramie. Anybody know? I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it was Laramie. And then Cheyenne, and I believe they passed one in Casper, and I think there's one also in Jackson that was passed as well. They tried I think it was in 2016, so it would have been that next year, the city of Gillette, under the previous mayor, Louise Carter King, who was a real advocate for this type of ordinance or this type of law. They were trying to push it through, but the city council really kind of rebuffed the idea. And so what they ended up doing is they created a resolution instead. And a resolution is just a formal statement. It's more bark than it is anything else. It has no bite. And essentially it was for them, it was kind of speaking on behalf of the city, but it was more for city policy, right? That the city as an employer is not going to discriminate based on a litany of other things. Usually it's all of these different social groups, these protected classes that are made in that regard. So that brings us kind of up to speed today, where your city council here in Gillette recently decided they were going to up the ante and they were going to try for an ordinance again. Now, it's built many different ways. They're calling it now like a hate speech ordinance or something like that. It's all pretty much the same. We'll kind of talk about that. We have a city administrator who's been hired on at the West Coast, I think somewhere in Washington, and I guess this is his parting gift here to Gillette. I want to read something here because this is, for me, I just kind of find this humorous and counterintuitive as far as why they're wanting to institute this. And this comes from the city of Gillette's own documents here. This is the background for this piece of ordinance, this law. So the city of Gillette is a thriving municipality known for its strong sense of community and care for one another. The city council has continually prioritized strengthening the local economy through industry diversification and job creation, and by both existing and new businesses. So where they're coming from with this, if you were there at the city council meeting, you heard this from several of the speakers. They are coming from this from an aspect of it's good for business. This is going to make Gillette somehow more business friendly if we carve up people into different groups and discriminate, or make some people victims and some people oppressors, that kind of thing. That's supposed to somehow make Gillette more business friendly. That's where they're coming from on this. And this is the angle. Now make no mistake, I believe that's more of a patsy, right? This is more virtue signaling to the left, to the loudmouths who really want to force their culture and their values in your face. They're going to make they're going to be heard no matter what, and you're going to know about it. This is what it's really about. It's about virtue signaling. But they're coming from it from an economic diversification standpoint. And of course, this is something that's been going on in our community. We've got legislators here. I see Senator McEwen here, and I don't know, am I missing someone? I'm horrible. I shouldn't have even said that because I'm going to miss someone here. But you hear this all the time. It's like the golden egg that Wyoming is always trying to chase after, economic diversification. And it's the golden egg that we just can't seem to find. So this is going to fix that, so they say. It goes on and it says this. The city also recognizes our low unemployment rate will likely require employees to look outside the community for new employees. Think about that for a second, right? We want businesses to set up here in Gillette, but we don't have the labor pool big enough, so we're going to have to go outside and find other people to come here. If Gillette doesn't have the labor pool, do you think there's going to be businesses that actually set up shop here to begin with? Probably not. It's kind of counterintuitive, right?
Right.
I mean, you can poke holes in this all day long. It says this ordinance aims to proactively address creating a safer environment for our residents, visitors, and potential future residents to increase community confidence in the fact that Gillette is truly welcoming and supportive of all people. So in other words, they are making a value statement. That value statement is Gillette is a dangerous place to live. How many of you feel that Gillette is a dangerous place to live? I mean, our streets are just ridden with crime, right? It's like Chicago here in Gillette. I mean, people are getting shot every day, aren't they? No, of course, that's ridiculous. That's what I'm saying. This is a patsy. This is a value statement that has no merit at all to say that Gillette is not a safe place. And of course, they do this based upon anecdotal evidence. So one of the things that was brought up, many of you know Pizza Carrillo. They find business. They serve a good product. They're always busy. They're booming in Gillette. They're doing really well for themselves. But apparently the two that own the joint are lesbians, and of course they feel oppressed. And because of that, I guess their business is suffering, which it really isn't suffering. But they're going to say it's suffering. You can see how ridiculous this is. And it's just frustrating more than anything else. And I got to quit. I'm going to get frustrated here in a second. Just irritates me. They go on and they say this. This ordinance is not aimed at curtailing thought or speech. Have you read it? My goodness. You talk about pouring a cold bucket of water on people and what they say. It says all Americans have the right to believe and speak freely. And again, they're just speaking out of both sides of their mouth because they can and because they have to. This is what government typically does. By passing this ordinance, the city establishes penalties for criminal acts perpetrated based on bias, hate, or discrimination. This type of behavior creates a hostile environment that is both harmful both to the victims of such crimes and the community as a whole. You know how many hate crimes we've seen in Gillette? 0. You'll say, we don't have any data for that at all. You know how many hate crimes they found in Cheyenne since Cheyenne instituted this? 0. Goose egg, nothing. No one's been charged under this. And it begs the question, well, what was Cheyenne? I mean, why did they pass it? Like, what was the pressing need? What was the gaping hole that we had to fill with this ordinance to make sure that, that their community and this community is somehow safer? And the answer is there isn't anything. We have no data at all. And now they're doing this kind of this game where it's, well, we've got to pass the law so that we can start collecting data, so then we really know. That's kind of like the Nancy Pelosi thing. We got to pass it first so that we can find out what's in it. Yeah. That's essentially the angle. They think you're fools. This is what it amounts to. This is patronizing to the citizens of this community. Absolutely astounding that they would have the gall to do such a thing. They treat you as children. I mean, it's not right. I hope this video is seen by some of the city council and they realize that you're patronizing citizens. It's virtue signaling. Oh, sorry. Oh.
correct.
It says this: the state of Wyoming is one of only 2 states in the nation that does not have a hate crime law on the books. And that's a bad thing. Why?
Because we don't need it.
There you go. There you go.
Make us proud.
Yeah, cheers for Wyoming and South Carolina.
It says this: to address this deficiency at the state level, several of Wyoming's largest municipalities have passed local ordinances dealing with anti-hate legislation, including Cheyenne, Casper, Laramie, and Jackson. And I gave you the backstory of how that came into being. There are 2 major components to this ordinance. Number 1, it prohibits people from injuring or threatening to injure another person or the person's property based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, ethnicity, national origin, ancestry, or disability. So, if someone with, I don't know, there's like 126 genders out there or something now. Now let's say someone who's, I can't even think, they're just crazy. Let's call them a rainbow gender. The rainbow gender person comes and he's trying to recruit your child for something. I don't know. They show up, dressed as a drag queen at the library or something like that, and you're pretty upset about that. And you make the comment, something, look, you're grooming children, because that's what they're doing, right? And we all know that. If you don't get out of here, if I catch you around my child again, I am going to blank, whatever that is. This can make you a criminal. This is what this does. And this doesn't cool free speech? Come on. We all know better than that. Let me do a little bit of a caveat here. I don't know, and of course, you're never really going to know if they do their jobs well. You will never know if the city administrator, if he doesn't do his job well, you know where he stands on this. But the city attorney and the chief of police, you will never know where they stand on this issue because they have to remain neutral. They have to remain nonpartisan. They don't get to have an opinion. They have an opinion, but they don't get to say it out loud. And chances are, and I'm just shooting in the dark here, I really don't know, but my guess is that the chief of police and probably most of the police force think this is a bunch of garbage and they're never going to enforce it. It's probably the truth. That doesn't mean there might be some rogue person that does. My point is if this passes, there's a specific reason why they want this. They want to cool free speech. It's likely never going to get enforced. It's likely never going to actually, it'll be on the books, but nothing probably will ever come to it, come anything of it. Again, it's all virtue signaling. That's what it's designed to do. Number 2, it prohibits people from inciting violence against another person or property based on race, color, religion, and a litany of other things that I just mentioned a moment ago. Let me put this into perspective a little bit. Good old Ed Sisti and Family Life Church, Marty Crump. They were the ones a few years ago when we had the transgender magician come into town. Of course, I opened my mouth on Facebook because that's what I do. And Ed's church decided that they were going to, they gathered with other people. They're going to create a protest there at the library, which they have a right to do. Family Life Church decided to do like this Jericho march. They marched around the library after hours, praying to shut the thing down. My church was the one that got blamed for it.
Yeah.
Fancy that, right? Yeah. Former legislator, guy who's known for his views. Oh, and by the way, I helped get Sarah Burlingame fired from the legislature. She is the executive director of Wyoming Equality. She was in the legislature one term while I was in the legislature, and I ran her through the coals because she was sexually exploiting kids. Her organization was, and I called in, numerous times to Glenn Woods' program. I was just having fun creating a firestorm down there and got her fired. And, that's great. But I certainly gained an enemy, and I had a target on my back. And so guess who just was conveniently up in Gillette at, I think it was an Ava drag show or something, I'm not sure, during all of this time, Sarah Burlingame. Guess what happened that night? My church was vandalized. Mm-hmm. Trans lives matter. I had rainbows and things like that were permanent. I mean, this is permanent stuff, you know, in the back of our church and all that kind of stuff.
Excuse me, was that a hate crime then?
Under this, it potentially could. Now here's where I'm going with this. That was vandalism, right?
It's already a law.
It's already, bingo, it is already a law. So here's the thing that you need to understand, and if I go through, and I'll kind of touch on this, but some of the things that if you in a discriminatory way cause physical harm or injury to another person, you cause another person's real or personal property to be damaged, destroyed, vandalized, defaced, trespassed upon, or stolen for any period of time, or threatened in any manner to do the act prohibited above if there is reasonable cause to believe that such an act will occur. In other words, these are enhanced penalties. And there is a serious policy discussion out there when it comes to enhanced penalties. I am not an enhanced penalty guy. I think the laws on the books are good and just and fair. There is equality under the law. You do X, Y, or Z, then you know this is what's going to happen to you. It doesn't matter who you are, and granted, you know when you go through the sentencing phase of a trial and all that, they're going to take into consideration certain things. What this does is it's essentially an enhanced penalty. So my church was vandalized. Never did catch the perpetrator. Don't know who it was. We didn't have cameras up at the time. But if that person was caught, they would be obviously tried and hopefully convicted under the law for vandalism, destruction of property, right? But what this would do is this would add an enhanced penalty. So what this essentially says is if you can prove that they did this based upon hate or some kind of discrimination, in this case they were discriminating against the church because they didn't like what the church stood for or whatever, you know, yada yada, then they could be also charged with a secondary crime, and it would be a misdemeanor. So this is a misdemeanor. We're not talking like a felony or anything like that, but it's still, you know, you're a misdemeanor. It's not like a status crime or anything like that. Yeah.
Well, and another thing that they do with that is Jerry Spence in his book, Police State. He says the big thing with the police, they protect the people in power. Basically, the police protect the government officials.
Sure.
And when they charge somebody, they overcharge them. They charge them with anything conceivable
Yeah. Well,
to it, and then
they plead
they
down.
say,
Yeah.
we'll make you a plea, we'll take away the top 2 or 3
Right.
crimes if you plead guilty to this lesser crime.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of the standard thing that they do. Where this is particularly egregious. So I'm just speaking what I think. All right. Number one, there is a legitimate policy debate on whether or not enhanced penalties should exist, and maybe you think that they do, and you can give your reasonings for that. Okay, I disagree, but that's a legitimate argument that people can have. And I recognize that that's a serious discussion that people can have. But what this does is it inserts identity politics, it inserts what's commonly known as critical race theory or social Marxism into the law code. And this is what makes this particularly egregious. And so I like to, essentially what we have is it creates inequity in the law, where some people are more equal than others. Because right now under the law, you know, we are all equal under the law.
Right.
That's how it should be, right? There's a reason that Lady Justice is blind. What this does is it takes the blindfold off. That's what it does. And it essentially says, it directs the government to look at certain particular protected classes that it creates via an ordinance like this, and it says you need to treat those protected classes different from everybody else. So, obviously, you can all see I'm disabled, right? Someone beats me up because I'm disabled. And and expressly, they hate disabled people. You know, people in wheelchairs. Just get under their skin. I don't know. And he comes and punches me in the face. You know, that would be assault, right? battery, but if it could be proven that a person attacked me because they hated me, because of my now protected class that the government has given me, because I need more privilege according to the government, more than the rest of you, then they could be charged in a more harsh way than, let's say, my daughters. Let's say my two girls, let's say someone hated their dad, and because they hated their dad, they beat up my girls. Now my girls are not in a protected class, right? Someone via hate beat them up because they hated their dad, but now the perpetrator against them gets treated lesser than the perpetrator that hit me. You see the disparity here. And so this is what I'm talking about. This inserts, and this is just let's be honest, this is just a tiny little step in that direction. It's not huge, but that's how it works, right? I mean, you think about Chicago, and you think about Portland, and you think about San Francisco. They didn't get over there, or get that way overnight, folks.
Right.
This has been like 10, 20, 30 years coming. You see what's happening in Chicago, and it starts with stuff like this.
Right.
This is how it starts. And it starts with this whole mentality that there needs to be protected classes. Some groups need to have a little bit more privilege in order for the outcome to be equal for everybody.
Right.
It's the old argument of equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. Equality of outcome is social Marxism. And we're all familiar with Marxism as socialism, right? In monetary terms. I mean, we all understand, right? It's the idea like, you make money, but it doesn't matter how much money you make. You can make a bunch of money, but you're going to give it all to the government anyway, and they're going to distribute it equally to make the outcome equal for everybody.
Exactly.
You can work it really, you can, this guy over here can be a bum, but he's going to get the equal amount because that's equality of outcome. This is the same thing, only when it comes to social circumstances. So we're going to make the outcome equal for everybody. So what this does is it creates all of these different protected classes, and it inserts this inequity in the legal code. Essentially what it is the government now inserting prejudice and bigotry into the legal code. The people who were crying out against discrimination are now the discriminators. That's what this is. They're discriminating against you. Yeah.
I was watching a report yesterday, and the state of Minnesota has declared minor attracted people as a protected class, and their legislature is now trying to remove the criminality of you having sex with a child because it represses the protected minor attracted person.
And that's eventually, I mean,
That's where this goes.
This is eventually, yeah. And again, I mean, let's be real. Let's not over exaggerate. Like what's happening in Gillette isn't going to lead to that, tomorrow. But over the course of time, it will, because it's always these little encroachments upon liberty. And this is how they nickel and dime you. It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's that kind of thing.
So,
Yes.
So, Scott, you're saying is that this promotes, this promotes behavior.
Right. This is government trying to, and let's face it. I know some people like to say that you cannot legislate morality. Folks, every law is a moral law. Every law is a statement on morality. When we say you shall not kill, that's a statement of morality. Every law is like that. And so government is playing some kind of role, whether we like it or not, in determining what morality is. Only what they're doing is they're trying to push us in the morality of social Marxism.
So
Also
about,
one step towards anarchy.
Bingo. Yeah.
about 20 years ago, Michael Savage used to be on the radio in Gillette. I think he was on sometime around 6 p.m., something like that. And he said, I was pulling into Don's when he could pick up some groceries, and he said, this legislation stuff, they legislate something, you get desensitized, and then another level happens, and then another level happens, and guess what? He was correct.
Yep. This is, think about it. They passed their resolution, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and now what are they doing? They just keep moving in that general direction. And there's some, you've got an enemy out there. You've got a political enemy or a political foe. And rest assured, you know who's behind this, right? Wyoming Equality is behind this. They're very organized. I know how they work. I know how they lobby against people. I know how they make people feel. I mean, I was on the phone talking with some of our city councilmen even before the initial vote and everything like that. And some of them just feel like they have no choice because that's how the left works. They make it appear as if everybody is for this, and if you're not, you're a prejudiced bigot, and we're going to get you fired. And I know how that works. People tried to get me fired when I worked at the Yes House, when I spoke out against the mayor over issues like this. I know how this works. I know how they work. I know how they try to make our elected officials feel. They want to make you feel all alone and on an island, and you better not go against them. And that's how they were feeling. Thankfully, some of them had the courage to stand up against this. It was a split vote. It was a 3-4 vote. So the people on your council who voted against this, thankfully, were your mayor. And by the way, some people think, well, the mayor should have never even let this happen to begin with. The mayor has a lot of say in things, but if any city council person has the right and the privilege via their elected status, being duly elected, to propose something to that council. The mayor can't act like a tyrant and a dictator and say, you can't do that. You don't want tyranny either. All right, so for some of you people who think that the Mayor Lundvall is a bad guy in this and should have stopped this, you're essentially what you're wanting him to do is act like a tyrant and
Act like Louise.
yeah, act like Louise. Yeah, it's essentially right. So your mayor voted against this. City Council Ward 1, Trish Simonson, she's one of mine. She voted against this. I mean, and thankfully, that was good. And it was a hard decision for her because she was feeling this pressure. But you talk about, the moral courage to do the right thing. You see someone like that, folks, let them know. Let them know. Encourage that kind of behavior. Thank you for standing up for me. Thank you for standing up against this kind of encroachment upon our liberties, or however you want to phrase that. And then the other person who voted against this was Tim Karsrud. Those that voted for it, Billy Montgomery. Billy Montgomery is a, he's a Democrat. He's a registered Democrat.
He's a leftist.
And so it's not surprising that he would bring this, right? He's in pretty good with Wyoming equality and all that kind of stuff. It's not surprising. He's the one that brought it. And then you had 3 other council people that supported this. You had Heidi Gross, who supported this. You had, is it Jim West? He's new. He's also Ward 1. He supported this. And you had McClellan, Councilman McClellan, who supported this as well. Now, where do we go from here? There's 2 more readings. It has to go through 3 readings before it becomes an official ordinance. So it's not an official ordinance yet. And I'm still kind of confused because even at the last city council meeting, it sounded like they weren't going to allow public comment on this issue any further. And I think the community is going to have to say something about that, especially when it comes to the public comment section. We'll talk about what we can do here in just a second. I don't see the numbers changing. I really don't. I thought that maybe Jim West might be able to persuade him. I don't see McClellan changing. I certainly don't see Billy Montgomery changing. And I don't know if Heidi Gross would change or not. So here's what I'm proposing. This is and I'm not, I was invited to come share, what are you trying to do about this? I want to lessen the momentum. We're not going to engage in that type of activity. Of course, the left squeal, like they always do, you bigots and all this kind of stuff, because they like those protected classes. So what I'm suggesting is doing something similar. And maybe, I think diplomacy can still win the day when it comes to some of these things. Like I said, I still think this is going to pass because it is virtue signaling to the left. Still, I raised the question, and I've done it on social media. I don't know how discriminatory practices by the city of Gillette somehow makes Gillette more business friendly. Still haven't figured that one out. And of course the answer is it doesn't. It doesn't. But what businesses like more than anything else is money, right? They'll be nice to people if it makes, them more money. And they will ride on the wave of political correctness if it makes them more money. So why is this good for business? Because it's politically correct, and because right now this kind of political correctness will make them money, even though in the long run it divides the community. So that's what's going on there. What I'm proposing here, you can find the ordinance on the City of Gillette's platform. Essentially, what I'm suggesting and what I'm going to pitch to some of the councilmen. I'm hoping that maybe if I can get the mayor and Trish Simonson and Carsrud and maybe West or maybe Gross to eliminate all of the different protected classes and just so it would say something like this. So I'll just read the ordinance, proposed ordinance. It says, malicious harms based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, etc., etc. Essentially, what I want to do is just make it say, malicious harms based on discrimination, period. Get rid of all of those things. I still think it sucks. I still think it's bad. I still think it needs to fail. But there's something about reframing things like this. It kind of awakens you to the ridiculous nature of it. And I'm hoping that we'll do that to maybe one of them to where we can defeat this thing altogether. But even if we can't defeat it altogether because they want a virtue signal, we can take away the momentum of the left and essentially say, we're not going to do the social Marxism, political game kind of stuff, but we're just going to say we will not discriminate, period. Again, we do the same thing through the rest of the statutes, or through the rest of the ordinance, I should say, where you get rid of all those protected classes and you insert discrimination. Essentially is what it looks like. It's pretty simple. Essentially what that does is it has the same effect, doesn't change the effect. It may still cool free speech. It's likely never going to be enforced. No one's probably ever going to go to jail for something like this. It's still going to have an adverse effect, but it deadens, it lessens the momentum. That's where I'm going with this thing. Like I said, I hope maybe by reframing it and seeing discrimination and reading it in light of that, they see how ridiculous this is. But who knows if they'll do that. So that's my angle. Yes, sir.
Scott, think about what's going on in federal government right now with January 6th. They're now classified and deemed as insurrectionists. Fox News just lost a lawsuit. Okay, they settled on a lawsuit. They didn't say they were right or they were wrong. However, you don't think the federal government paid Fox off to get that status of insurrectionists. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of disagree a little bit with your, we probably won't go to jail. I think it's the opposite. I think you will go to jail on that type of crime.
Yeah.
And they'll make you a martyr.
Yeah.
And but just think about what's going on right now with January 6th. Nothing bad happened. There's a few people that got hurt, but you can't insurrect without weapons. Nobody had one gun.
Yeah.
You can say that they
did,
had guns in their
right?
hotel room,
Yeah.
but that's speculation.
Yeah.
And that's them saying, the FBI saying that they found it on the Proud Boys.
Yeah.
But just think about that.
Yeah.
If you
No,
could
I don't
take
want
the
to.
whole
Yeah,
picture
that's a
on
great comment, and I don't want to. I don't want to insinuate that this is never going to be a problem. Certainly, it's going to depend on the police chief, and it's going to depend on the police force, right?
I want to hear this, Scott.
And so, yeah, I'll call on you here in just a second. So, and even if it doesn't happen today, as long as it stays on the books, what happens? 5 years down the road, you get someone who's real zealous, and they start enforcing it. So yes, I certainly see that there is credible danger here as far as our liberties are concerned. Yeah, over here.
I asked the police chief directly what his opinion of it was.
He's not going to tell you.
He said, if it passes, I will enforce it.
That's what he has to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he kind of laughed, and I said, well, that's understandable. If he was an elected official, I would have been pretty upset. But since he's hired, that is his job.
Well, he could, if he said otherwise, he said, I'm not gonna enforce this, guess what's gonna happen? He's out the door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to be like Illinois, where they said they wouldn't disobey the Constitution.
Yeah.
37 sheriffs told them to pound sand.
Yeah. Well, sheriffs are a little bit different because sheriffs are elected, right? But the police chief is not elected. He serves at the pleasure of the city council. Over here.
I would just say that a very similar law in Canada landed a couple preachers in
Yes.
jail.
Yeah.
So this is very serious.
Yeah. Let me give you a few things that you can do, okay? And we can field more questions. And I don't know if we have someone else speaking and stuff.
Yeah, Rebecca's gonna speak.
Okay, so I need to make this quick and I'll.
And you might wanna hang out just.
Sure.
At the end to
Sure.
answer questions.
Yeah, and we can answer questions. You know, I'm not in a rush to get anywhere. Few things that you can do. Number one, you really need to reach out to your city councilman.
Yes.
Request a sit-down meeting. Request that they walk you through the proposed ordinance and explain how it doesn't make you a criminal. Because if they can't explain it to you, I mean, think about that. You're my elected official and you can't explain this? Why are you voting for this then? Like, just probe a little bit. But do that. Every single one of you should get on the horn and you should request a sit-down meeting. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the more community interest in that, it shows them that they may not be ready to pass this thing. There's a reason that the legislative process, we have public there's all sorts of different ways of public input. And they are trying to ramrod this through with as little public input as possible. You need to be the wall that slows them down. And you do that by getting on the phone, requesting a sit-down meet, and explain to me how this doesn't make me a criminal. Explain to me how this works. And are you willing to negotiate to get rid of these protected classes or whatever? Twist their arm a little bit. Be kind about it. Don't be a jerk for Jesus, okay? That's not going to gain you any influence. Believe me, it doesn't. Be sweet about it. Kill them with kindness. But reach out to them. So that's number one. Do that. Number two, show up to the city council meetings. We've got to flood them. We've got to show up. We've got to speak during the public comment time. Now, they might try to limit our public comment. But this is, again, where people stand up and be like, oh, wait a second. You know, you're trying to ramrod this through without giving us an explanation of what this is. This isn't right. This isn't good. Don't you value public feedback? You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So do that kind of stuff as well. And then also, as you meet with your city councilman, ask them if they would be willing to make amendments. Or are you just going to ramrod this? Are you going to actually be a little bit diplomatic? And I think where you might get there with someone. So Heidi Gross is the vice chairman of the Republican Party. She won by one vote. And she has an interest to serve Republicans. So that might be an inroad with Heidi to say, hey, look, we might see eye to eye in this, but are you willing to give a little bit, get rid of these protected classes at least? Because that's not a Republican value. And see if you can't work with her a little bit to get this thing changed. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but it's worth a shot.
Question.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it make more sense to have the town ordinance be more in line with Article 1, Section 20 of the Wyoming State Statute under speech and press?
Right. But there are state statutes already on the books that prohibit discriminatory practices. And truthfully, and I don't like it, there are protected classes in our statutes. There's protected classes in your Wyoming Constitution. Let's not pretend that they aren't there. They're there. This is an expansion upon that. This is why we call them SOGI laws, because sexual orientation and gender identity are not in your Wyoming Constitution, and they are not in your Wyoming statutes. There's a reason that they are trying to put it in all of these different city ordinances, because they're trying to expand the law. That's why they're so, this is why, again, it's all virtue signaling. But there's different ways that you can combat this, and I hope that even in my brief time talking to you, it's given you some ideas, some things to approach this. Now, if you come at it from, I have chosen not to come at it from, attacking LGBT groups and all, and that lobby and all that stuff. I've chosen not to do that. I've chosen to come at it from the standpoint of social Marxism is bad, critical race theory is bad, and we shouldn't be having protected classes within our own penal code. It should be equality for all,
Right.
not just for some. That's the way I've chosen to go about doing it. And I believe that's a winning argument. You have to do what works for you. But the more people start saying this kind of stuff, and I guarantee the argument that I just expressed to you, that didn't run through their heads. And now it is. And hopefully they're thinking about it. All right, one more question, and then we'll let the other person speak. Yes?
Okay, I have a question. They have to change it to be legal. Will they have to start the process all over?
Good point, that's what I was thinking too. Do they have to do the reading again?
So I don't know. I don't know. So that's a good. I was thinking about this on the way here. Can they amend the statute? Is that part of their readings? Because this is how we do it in the legislature, right? You have different periods where you can amend it and all that kind of stuff. There's a reason we have many different readings so that you can go ahead and make those amendments and so on and so forth. I don't know if that's the case for the city council, but that's all the more reason then to argue and say, hey, wait a second, we haven't thought this through. This isn't ready for prime time. If we're going to put something out, let's really think this through. Let's really get some public input on this thing. It doesn't sound like you're willing to listen to us at all. And so you can argue along those lines. But I'm coming at it from the assumption that they can make amendments over the next two readings and pass it in that way. And so that's the angle that I'm coming from on this. Yes?
Scott, I spent an hour on the phone with one of the council people the other day, and they told me one of the reasons they voted for it, and there's several reasons why, was so they could get it out there to amend it. And that was one of their driving forces.
They considered it what, or what?
Pardon me?
I couldn't hear you.
They said one of the reasons why they did vote for it was so they could amend it. They could get it in the process of doing an amendment.
Sure. Well, we'll see what happens.
And just a little addition to that, this person was very upset with the way people were handling and talking to them. And he said for every extremely vile and negative comment that he got, he says it made it more, it cemented it more in his mind, or their mind, on how they were going to vote. But it was indicated that instead of just letting it die, but part of the reason was so they could amend it, was why it at least passed the first reading.
Sure. Well, that's good information. That's good feedback, right? You can push people in the other direction. So be a little bit diplomatic, be a little bit tactful in how you do it. And I know how hard that can be, because you just saw me get animated about this whole thing. But I would encourage you to do those things. All right, thank you for your time. I'll stick around, and if there's time afterward, if they want to do some more Q&A, we can do that. But thank you for being here and listening. Sure.
Rebecca Painter has spoken with Chief Deaton, and she brought up some things, and so I will let her speak to that. Thank you, Rebecca.
Well, it's nice to see so many people all in the same place who care about freedom of speech. I have a great concern about this ordinance, and if anybody hasn't read it, you really need to get a copy of this, or I'll give you a copy of this, and you need to read how they are trying to keep you from having any kind of a meaningful opinion. I was, first of all, I'll say that when I read this ordinance, it was very clear to me that Section B is absolutely unconstitutional. There is nothing to say in Section B of this ordinance. It talks about inciting, if your words or depictions or conduct were intended and likely to incite or produce violence, even if your attempt failed, you can be found guilty and charged with this misdemeanor. This is so subjective, it's appalling. It just makes me wonder if Sean Brown even wrote this, or if the city council put their best together and put together this ordinance. One of the first things that I would like to mention is when I first called Chief Deaton about Part B especially, he said, well, nobody can be charged if there isn't physical damage or physical harm. And I said, that is not true. Have you read this? So he assured me I was wrong, and that physical harm or damage had to occur in addition to whatever words were coming out of your mouth. Well, God bless Chief Deaton. He let me meet with him the next day. And I started out our visit by saying, in the first place, yeah, thank you. I get nervous. In the first place, okay, sorry, just nervous. In the first place, what Part B is not connected to Part A. Those are two different opportunities for police to find you guilty of something. So when I went in to see him, I said, in my mind, having experienced the long arm of the law to the tune of several years of my life, and somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000, I take these laws very seriously. And for some reason, the police chief thought that A and B couldn't happen unless physical damage happened first. Well, he said, well, I have my screen right in front of me. He was looking at it on the computer. And I said, well, look at your screen. It does not say and. These are two separate opportunities to be charged with something. Now, what's also interesting is in our newspaper, the newspaper editor has the same lack of understanding. Let's get this clear. The law does not pertain to speech alone. Part B is absolutely speech alone. So my first concern is the city manager did make it clear, as Scott read, that these are two separate issues. He said there are two major components of this ordinance. So my first concern is a city manager who says these are two separate issues. And the chief of police, whose opinion was sought in putting this together, and the news record editor totally did not understand that these were two separate components. And it makes one wonder if that is contrived or if it's out of ignorance. And I would just say that either situation should be very concerning to those of us who fall under this law and that would be everyone here. In, go ahead.
I should probably clarify for you, Dr. Painter. The A and B actually fall under section 1. So I'm backing up what you're saying. Because section 1, chapter 14, section 14-42, section A and B fall under that same section. So you are correct. They are, it's plus. A plus B equals prosecution. You are right.
But you can be prosecuted on B alone.
That is correct.
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Yes, and it's just a real concern that we don't have, or we didn't have a chief of police who understood that. And it's even, I mean, what is this called? I guess if I wanted to be really hard on this editor, we could say he lied.
Well,
Total
again,
misinformation.
it may not be necessarily lies, but in this day and age that we live in, because we're going into socialism and totalitarianism, people are taught to be parrots, not thinkers.
Well, and I would just say that if the newspaper is written so that a fifth grader can understand it, I'm a little bit concerned that the editor could not read an ordinance and understand how to represent it honestly to the public.
Don't think he cares.
Yes.
The other alarming thing at that meeting, I listened to 6 different people talk about this ordinance. 6. And there were 6 different interpretations. The city manager is saying that the speech part of it is big, he can be prosecuted for that.
That's right.
The city attorney said, no, there's got to be harm done before we could look at the other part. And then 2 of the councilmen were like, well, it could go either way. And then another one says, let's not forget the threat part. The threat part is damaging. So at the end of the day, even in our Wyoming Constitution, it's unconstitutional for us to try to determine someone's intent. There has to be elements of a crime. And the real scary thing about this is there are no elements. This is, go see the judge, he'll roll the dice, and it depends if, he's in a good mood that day or a bad mood. So that's another alarming thing about this. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
It says, Sean Brown here in the article says speech alone is not enough. That's what our city attorney says.
But he's wrong.
And he's wrong.
When he leaves office, then what? The next one will say, yeah.
You know, when
That's the way it's written.
Yes, when I first talked to Chief Deaton, I told him that my opinion about any law is it should be examined carefully and consider the worst possible outcome. And if there is a worst possible outcome, the law needs to be reworked and reworded so that that worst possible outcome cannot exist. And the speech section is exactly why a couple preachers in Canada, and maybe there are more by now, ended up in jail. So as I pointed out to Chief Deaton, that it does not say and, these are A and B are separate opportunities for the police to come after you. And I said to Chief Deaton, I really did not appreciate Sean Brown saying, well, if you're falsely accused, just go get an attorney. I have very personal experience that way, and that is, in my opinion, is totally irresponsible on the part of the government making ordinances for us to follow. Yes?
I think it's alarming that you just brought it up that Chief Deaton was brought in to give his opinion on a law that's being broken, they're supposed to enforce laws and protect citizens. But regardless, that would be, if you know Chief Eaton well, I would bring that up and then basically cat's out of the bag, and now you had input in this ordinance, which is one, again, Senator McEwen's unconstitutional.
Yes, so I actually had a very productive, what I thought was a very productive conversation with Chief Deaton, covering a number of topics. And what I did, so that I'm not going to repeat my hour-plus conversation with Chief Deaton, but I came up with some points I would like to share with you. One was, there was absolutely no data. And in fact, what to Chief Deaton's credit, after the meeting on Tuesday, he went back to his office and asked somebody to go through phone calls to see how many phone calls might have fallen into this category. And he said since 2007, they could for sure identify 30 phone calls. And I said, well, how many phone calls do you get a month? I mean, 30 in the last 16 years. How many calls to the police department do you get? 35,000. And I said, oh, and he said, well, there were just a few calls. I said, well, let me understand this. If we take 35,000 a year times 16 years and divide that into 30, that's not a few, that's like minuscule. So basically there is no data. And I think if we look at no calls in Cheyenne and these other communities that have passed the laws, if there had been zero, that somewhat is evidence about how this kind of a law chills speech, so that people are not going to complain. Okay, just to begin with, probably most crimes are hate crimes for one reason or another. And probably everyone in here has been offended, your feelings have been hurt, and because of the part of the country we live in, it was probably mostly by white people, right? I mean, think about, you know, your relationship with your spouse or whoever is really close to you. I mean, people just plain have differences of opinion. And if somebody is redheaded, they might perceive that it's because they have red hair. Or if somebody is short, it's because I'm short. Or if somebody is black, it's because I'm black. And the truth is, humans have trouble getting along, period. I mean, that's kind of the human condition. So if we say most crimes are hate crimes as opposed to love actions, they're all hate crimes, right? So, and getting numbers do matter. The second real concern I had was who is going to define words like malicious and intimidation and intent? Who defines that? I said to Chief Deaton, you know, he was sitting down so I didn't have to look up too much, but he's a big guy. And he was in the military for a few years. And I said, you know, you cannot understand how the person who just heard what you said or saw what you did is going to perceive that. And I said to him, you know, you're a great big guy. I would bet you could intimidate, or somebody could feel intimidated by you, and you wouldn't even have to open your mouth. I mean, this is so subjective, it's appalling. The next thing is, speaking of special groups, in my mind, two of the groups that are not included in groups that need special protection are young children and old adults. Okay, so if some little old lady is walking down the street and somebody steals her purse, did the person who stole her purse stole it believing there wouldn't be much of a fight or she couldn't run fast enough? And what about our kids? Are we going to have policemen going into schools and hauling out kids who are being bullied? Or are they going to haul out the kids complaining about being bullied? I mean, this is a huge issue. Just, you know, and what will be the age of enforcement, because that's not even addressed in this. And then I would like to say concerning enhancement, that is already built into at least criminal law and civil law, and probably to some degree in these ordinances, where, you know, all the time you read in the newspaper, if somebody can be put away for 12 to 20 years, well, wouldn't you call 18 years an enhancement? You know, so that is actually already built into the law, depending on the judge. I would like to say that at the end of my meeting with Chief Deaton, I said, how can you help us? We need help. How can you help us? And by then he had come to an understanding, and in fact, he told me that Section B is not even prosecutable. I said, why would we be passing a law that you can't even prosecute? The only reason Section B, or not Section B, but Part B, would be in here is to harass you. Okay, if you spoke more than twice at a meeting and the politically correct didn't agree with you, okay, they're going to harass you, and now you can go get your attorney, because Sean Brown thought that was just fine for you to have to pay every time you're falsely accused. This is not funny. This is serious. And do we want our city council passing an ordinance that is not even provable or prosecutable? I mean, our community should be rising up and having a fit over this. This is disgusting. Okay, the last thing I'll say is, if we can be nice and believe that somewhere in somebody's heart there is true compassion for various groups. Diplomatic, did you say, Scott? Okay, so if we can believe that, then I think what we could request is a greater consideration for all the issues that have been raised. This was prematurely brought forth before these issues were discussed or considered, and passage at this point would truly be premature of a meaningful bill. So anyway, when I said to Chief Deaton, okay, how can you help us? He said, well, I will go talk to Sean Brown. And I said, well, okay, but what can we do? And he suggested talking with our city council people and requesting that they make the amendment to strike section B because it isn't prosecutable anyway. So in discussing this with Pastor Ed, what I'm working on, and I know I should have it done tomorrow, is a flyer of some sort that we could distribute, trying to increase awareness and encouraging other people to show up. Wouldn't it be nice to have 500 people show up?
Yes.
Yes.
I think one of the things we might focus on is, as you pointed out, there is no interpretation that they have proved. And how can you pass something that's A, probably not constitutional, and B, certainly not open, or certainly is not closed for interpretation. They don't even know what they've written here.
Exactly.
And if it's not prosecutable, it's not a crime. You can't prove a negative.
It's good for harassing the citizenry.
Well, not only that, but it's a revenue trap. Everything
exactly.
boils down to two things.
That too.
Who benefits and where's the money?
Yep.
And this is going to open up federal money, and I would imagine at least one or two people on that council know it and think we're stupid.
Yes.
A year or so ago, we had a meeting in this room, and the topic was Know Your Enemy, and they showed us excerpt from a book from an ancient Chinese philosopher, military person, said, know your enemy. Well, if you go back, the enemy is the Marxist philosophy, Marx and Engels, useful stooges. Of course, it would probably incite them if we pointed that out to them. So, like it was said, somehow try to figure out how to get the point across diplomatically. And they said other things too. When it comes time to hang the bourgeois capitalists, they'll haggle over which one of them sells us the rope.
Yes.
Okay, so we all in this room agree this is unconstitutional. Every city council person, didn't they have to swear an oath to the Constitution? Yes. So therefore, they are violating the oath. Why can we not remove these people? And has anybody in here heard of bonds for the win? As I understand it, elected officials have to either carry a surety bond or they have to be insured. So, could we not as citizens all file complaints against their surety bonds or against their insurance? And if we get enough claims, just like us with car insurance, you get enough claims, they dump your ass and you can't get elected again because you can't get carried by. Why are we putting up with this? This is opening a door to lawfare against us. We need to recall these people. Why can we not recall them? Why can we not impeach them? I tried to find this out. I called the city. I said, I found a thing on the internet that said you need 25% of the voting public to impeach someone. And then people, oh, well, you can't do that in a city. Why the hell not?
So I'll answer your questions. First of all, I don't know anything about the surety bond thing. As a legislator, I never had to carry anything like that. So I think that's probably some misinformation. Someone's probably telling you that. Senator Troy McEwen back there doesn't carry any insurance. You know, we just answer to the people. That's just how it is.
Well, the state is self-insured. To a certain.
I don't know. Like I said, I don't know anything about that, and maybe there's something there. I just don't know. So I can't speak definitively on that.
When you're done with that, I can speak.
As far as recall, the state. When I was in the legislature, we tried to get legislation passed that you could recall your elected officials. It's not. We don't have anything on the books. That is a legislature problem, and of course.
They're not gonna do anything now.
Well, there you go. So for many, it's one of those things they don't want to pass a law that could potentially get them fired. So but I sense your frustration. The third thing, yeah, everybody in this group would say this is unconstitutional. The problem is the courts say that it is. So what do you do, right? I mean, there's different things that people have talked about, whether that's nullification or states, fighting back and all that kind of stuff. And all those things sound good. I've never actually really seen it work. I've never seen it put into practice. So that's the problem here. Is yeah, it's the courts have found that these things are constitutional. We would all disagree with that very, very much. Now, I will say this, and Rebecca is right on, and we spoke on the phone before she met Chief Deaton as well. This thing is poorly written. It's horrible. That's why I encouraged you, sit down with your councilman and say, please tell me how this doesn't make me a criminal. Make them answer you. Because if they can't explain it, they have no business voting for it. All right, so there's a tactic there to go for it. And I just want to encourage you. Look, I know not everybody can be nice. I try to be nice. Sometimes I'm not always good at it. And I'm not asking you to be anything that you're not. We kind of need the good cop and we need the bad cop. We need the people who will really raise a fuss and not get belligerent or anything like that, but really make their displeasure known, because that's how you get a hold of your public officials. But if you have the ability to be a little bit diplomatic, use it, because we need both sides. That's really what I want to say that. And I'm not coming to the city attorney's defense. I don't know the guy from nobody, but I was telling Ms. Painter, he might be very, very much against this thing. But he can't say so. He's hired. He has to abide by ethics. He has got to produce something of merit. And who knows, maybe secretly he wrote junk and he knows he wrote junk just to get the people riled up. I don't know that. Nobody knows. And so I would just caution impugning motives to him, because he has to remain neutral. He's like the chief of police. And so there's just, you got to consider some of those aspects, all right? So anyway, I wanted to mention that. But yeah, we would all agree it's unconstitutional, but the courts say otherwise. There you go.
Has a civil ordinance been tried in the Wyoming Supreme Court based on the Wyoming Constitution?
I do not know. I don't know of any of the city ordinances that have passed this. It's been challenged, because I don't know of anybody who's actually been charged with a crime, right?
Okay, my second
so that's
question
just
is,
it.
I think that's probably the reason it hasn't been enforced in Cheyenne, is because it's unconstitutional. So if they enforce it, then they're guilty. But the other question I have is, at the Supreme Court, there's been at least 6 separate cases where they say hate speech laws are unconstitutional. And I think, I don't know about hate crime laws.
I would say, though, I mean, this is something that was brought up at the city council meeting. The attorney started citing some of the cases and whatnot. So at this point, you should trust Mr. Brown more than you should trust me, in that these things have been tried. I'm not saying it's constitutional, and I'm not saying that the Supreme Court, our Supreme Court, would strike it down, but I'm saying these types of laws have been passed everywhere. Think about it. 48 other states have passed such laws, and they have withstood scrutiny. And that's the scary thing about it. So consider that.
So if in the second sentence of the Part B, it says, words, depictions, or conduct were intended, who
Yeah.
perceives the intention are likely to incite it.
Yeah.
So, does that mean bumper sticker?
Yeah.
Does that mean what's on your t-shirt? And does that mean praying?
So
Because
that-
there are people against prayer, and that might offend them.
Bingo. So that right there,
Look at my
that is
shirt
that
right
is
now.
exactly what you need to
This
go
is
to
an
your.
example.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
I'm
what.
wearing.
Bingo.
Right.
What I'm saying
I'm
is,
gonna get offended.
those questions
So
right
I'm
there.
gonna say something.
Those questions bring to your city council people. Those are the things you need to ask them to get them
Yeah,
thinking.
it isn't, it's really vague.
Yeah.
And who's gonna perceive it? Is it gonna be some of the irate people that we deal with when we're just trying to talk about, please move
Yep.
that porn out of my kindergartner's classroom? And then, of course, we said porn, and they're saying we're attacking them, and then what, we end up arrested at the library meeting?
Yeah. Let me let you in a little secret on politics. I'm painting with a broad brush here. From my experience, most people in politics do not have a whole lot of moral courage. They're not gonna stand on their convictions. You'll have some that do, but most don't. And most are going to trust the judgment of people who are in professions that claim to be experts, i.e. attorneys. So what I'm saying here is those type of questions need to be asked of city council members as you take them and say, how does this not make me a criminal? And you give those different certain situations and you make them answer you. Because what that does is it breaks up the monotony. It actually makes them kind of think, and you're actually helping your representative to represent you and summoning that moral courage to stand up and say, hey, wait a second, I can't even explain this, so maybe we shouldn't pass this. Otherwise, you're going to go with the flow because that's how politics is done today. They just don't have the moral courage. So this is why it is extremely important. You have to talk to your elected officials. Get them on the phone. And you can do the email thing, but people hide behind that. That's easy to hide behind. You get them face to face, eyeball to eyeball, knees to knees, and you have the piece of paper or you request one and you say, how does this not make me a criminal? You explain this to me, Mr. City Council person, because you know what? I'm really fearful, and I think you're going to make me a law-abiding citizen a criminal, and you're supposed to represent me and hold their feet to the fire a little bit.
I just think it's a stepping stone to the next thing, and
It
the
is.
next thing.
It is. Back there.
If anybody is gonna meet with them, can you film it and put it on Rumble for us all to see what they actually said?
You can, I'm sure you could, but you run the risk of they're going to put up a wall right away.
Yep.
So I'm just saying, but there's power in numbers. So if this group in here, if every single one of you tomorrow got on the phone and requested a sit-down meet, you're like, I need to meet with you at City Council. You've got to make time for me. You're my representative, and you've got to explain this to me. And I got to be able to see this in your face, and I got to know what you're thinking. And you do that, and I guarantee they're going to start second-guessing some things. Back there, sir.
Just without getting into the weeds and looking at it logically, the second line says any person or group because. Where it says because, if you were to substitute everything after that with the word any reason, you would exclude none of the following clauses. You would include every single one that's there. And at the same time, you bring us right back to where we are tonight.
Bingo. It reveals the ridiculousness of it. And that's why I'm saying sometimes perspective, just changing some words, it's revelatory. Like, oh, like that's what this means. And you can see it for what it is, that it's garbage. It really is garbage. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody's thinking, boy, we got to do this, we got to do that. But there's one thing that I think that we're missing, totally. And this is a spiritual battle.
Yeah,
absolutely. And you know, the thing is every one of us need to be praying first. And you know, and God will direct us which way we want to go.
And God will direct our paths, and He'll direct what we need to say and what we need to do. You know, there's a guy, Charlie Kirk, he had, I don't know exactly, I wish it was my comment, but it's not his, but he says that man either believes, that you believe either that God created man or man created God. And so consequently, if we believe that God created us, then what we need to do is we need to, number one, it's a spiritual battle, so we need to be praying. Second thing, we need to go to our pastors, and we need to tell them, and we need to, if you have a prayer group at your church, they need to be on that prayer group. Because people don't know what this is. I don't even know about it. You guys know, I doubt if 10% of the people in Gillette actually even know what this is.
Only what they read in the paper.
So, you know, how do you get the people, the like-minded? The church. Ask the pastor, maybe the pastor will pray in front. A bunch of them don't have enough guts to do that. But we need to do that. That's the first thing we need to do, is get on our knees.
Preach, brother. That's good.
And then the next thing we need to do, we need to be smart about how we do this. I was on a board, and I can tell you, people will change if they get enough pressure. Scott's right. 90% of the time, people on the board don't even have a clue what they're voting on. They don't really research it. They don't know what's going on. They just go along because the administrator said it's a good deal, and the attorney said it's legal. And so they say, oh man, I'm going to vote for that. There's always unintended consequences. Always. Every single time. Now, you want a little strategy on my part? Now, I'm not as nice as Scott, but here's what you need to do. Number one, if they're only going to allow 10 minutes at a board meeting, then everybody's got to have enough courage to sit up front and everybody that's against the bill speak. You know, if you're sitting in the back and then somebody else speaks up there, then they get it. But if you want to do it, you're going to have to sit up front and you're going to have courage. And if you're afraid, just write down your thoughts. God will give you the thoughts to what to say. Doesn't have to be a whole lot. You can just say, I'm totally opposed to this because I believe this is against the way we are in Wyoming. Second thing is, all those people up there, you can call more than just your city council person. And if they get a lot of phone calls, and if every one of you in this room would ask 5 people, tell 5 of your friends about this. Because I guarantee you, if they get enough calls, Heidi, sorry, we keep calling her Heidi Fleiss at the coffee, but Heidi Gross works for the college. And if you know somebody on the college board, tell them, I don't agree with this. Why is your employee trying to do this to our community? You know, and you tell, you know, everybody here can come in here and go, oh man, I'm against this. But if you don't go and do something, then you just waste your time coming tonight.
Exactly.
I can tell you, I personally went and talked to a guy that's black that has done police work, and he said in 18 years, Gillette is as non-prejudiced place as he's ever been. Another thing is, how do you do this? The police are going to have to hire psychics to know what you're thinking. They're going to have to hire psychics. I went to the school district, I went to an individual, I can't say who it is, and I said, what do you think about this? He didn't even know about it. I explained it to him. What he told me was, I cannot have a comment as a school official. He said, I will be fired if I say anything. Off the record, personally, don't tell me anybody, he said, this will cause a mess that it'll open a can of worms. That's exactly what he said.
Cat's out of the bag now.
You know, also I went to the college basketball coach. The most blacks we have in town are on the basketball team and the football team. And I asked him, I said, have you had problems? He said, one time some guys drove by in a pickup truck at Walmart and said something to some guys. He said, no. He said, we don't have problems. So this is definitely just a queer bill.
Yeah.
And so consequently,
We need to, all of us need to have enough courage to call people. We need to, if we go to the meeting, we need to go to the meeting and we need to sit up front so we can talk. Think your thoughts beforehand. And number three, most important, we need to pray and have our churches pray. And through the churches, more people become educated what's going on.
Yeah, amen. Yes, sir.
First of all, amen to what I was said. Second of all, this is a bunch of woke word salad. Third of all, I didn't go to Vietnam to lose to the communists.
That's right.
Our Constitution is written based on biblical, Judeo-Christian ethics, morals, and principles. John Adams, one of the founding fathers, just warned us, it will not function correctly without those.
Amen.
I called 10 people. I sent those same 10 people emails. I asked them to vote against this. Only one of them answered the phone in no time. And that was the husband of MG.
Yeah.
And he said, we're going to vote no.
Yeah.
It's happening. This stuff is working. We just got to keep pressing.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. Listen, I'm going to give you my phone number. I got to go here. My daughter's calling me. She's at a play practice. So if you want my phone number, if you want to reach out to me, you're welcome to do so. My phone number is 307-660-7141. You can find me on Facebook as well. Again, my name is Scott Clem, and I am your chairman now of our county GOP. One more thing that I'll just say, and I want to echo and just accentuate the words that George just said a moment ago. Please be praying. When you talk to your city councilman, and if you do go and speak at a public meeting, the other thing that, don't be afraid to go up there and be like, I don't get this. Like, some people just think they don't want to be perceived as being dumb, right? Folks, this confuses me. Oh yeah, and I don't think I'm a dummy, but I'm confused by it. So that's why I'm saying, like, it's okay to do that, to say, explain this to me. I don't get this. Because the more and more you do that, it signals to your representatives that this is not ready to pass, that the community doesn't get it. It's going to create more chaos than it will help. So I'll just close with that. Ed, thank you, and Lyle, thank you for the invitation. Thanks for coming tonight, folks. And I got a boogie. I got to get my daughter. But if you would like to visit with me more, please reach out to me. Yeah, sir, go ahead.
I'd like to thank George for the comments that he made. I think they're the best ones made, but I'd like to introduce a couple of my own. One is that this is already happening. They sent a guy to prison for 10 years for what he wrote on Facebook about Hillary. This garbage is already happening, and we'd be foolish to think that we're not all going to be criminal suspects with Facebook police and what you text on your text phone, or, all this garbage. We need to stand up against this junk now.
Well, thank you, John. So it wasn't wrong when I said the other night to City Council that they would probably be up on the same, they would be guilty of the same law. Let's thank our speakers tonight. Can we do that? Yep.